It's great to be here. This is actually only my second time here, so I'm still a bit of a newbie. As Derek said, I've been actually doing my little side business on and off since 2006, which is kind of it's a business consulting, executive coaching thing, and through the graciousness of my wife and a few other factors that just kind of aligned, I have the opportunity to basically step out of the chaos of my last 25 years or so of work in the traditional sense and try the other side and see how it goes. It's always looked appealing, so we'll see where that is. So talking to Derek last time, one of the conversations that we had was one of the topics that I do talk about are mistakes that startups or small businesses typically make. And so he thought might be useful for this group, and so that's what we'll talk about this evening, and I'll kind of go through that. We've got a couple of questions, so we're a small group, so I'll try to make it a little more interactive than just listening, having me stand here and talk at you for 30 minutes. I can't think of anything worse personally, but and then there'll be time at the end as well for Q&A. So hopefully we'll cruise through that, and hopefully there'll be time for more beer afterwards as well. So with that, why don't we go ahead and jump in. So first, a little bit about me. We'll kind of go around the horn. I know it's a bit of a busy slide, but that's my family who've been kind enough to actually let me stop working for a real job for a while. So I'm married with my wife. Met her when I was in Japan. We have two kids, 6 and 7, that keep us quite busy. As was mentioned, my company is Centered Business Consulting. That's the company I currently run. But as you can see, I've kind of done the gambit of the big, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 thing over the years, and so that's kind of where I've been brought up. Originally from the East Coast, so I'm a transplant out to California. Born and raised on the East Coast, came here in '99, and other than 2 years in Japan, have basically lived somewhere in the state of California. I focus a lot on more the softer side of things because particularly given the current state of technology, a lot of the hard things, you either know it or you don't. It's very binary. It's the softer things that oftentimes trip up leaders and small businesses, in fact, businesses of any size. And so I'm just finishing up a second master's degree in organizational development and leadership, where I'm kind of looking specifically at resilience from an organizational perspective, stress and conflict, and how those all come together. But they all drive things that we'll be talking about tonight that all go around that a lot of times small businesses will get tripped up as they change where they're looking. And then in terms of me, I'm an INTP, so actually it's taken me many years to be very comfortable actually speaking in front of a group. I'm an uber introvert, although it doesn't come across that way, but after this I will go find a nice dark corner, have a glass of wine and chill because I find this challenging. So I try not to let that come through. I'm a total space geek. My original career path was actually to be an astronaut, so that was what I originally wanted to do for many years. Love Star Trek, Star Wars, anything space related. I'm also an ancient history buff. I like to joke that my idea of history kind of stops at the fall of Rome and picks up again kind of around the 20th century, and in between's a big gap. So, but it is what it is. And I also am a martial artist, and that's actually the basis and kind of the secret sauce, if you were, to a lot of what I do now, is really integrating management consulting, coaching, and martial arts philosophies to help businesses be much more profitable and grow profitably. So that's a little bit about me. So our topic tonight, I tried to make it a little interesting, but it really comes down to, as I've been doing quite a bit of research, as I mentioned on this, it's really what is the biggest mistake that small businesses tend to make? And then obviously, how do you try to avoid that, right? And so that's really what we're going to talk about. There is no silver bullet. If you do these things we're going to talk about here in 2 seconds, I can't guarantee you'll be successful, but I can guarantee based on data and what I've seen that the probability of success goes way up. So with that, everybody's got an opinion around what makes a business successful. From what I've seen, it actually all boils down to one thing, and that one thing is focus. And a lot of people throw the word focus around very casually. You could apply focus to just about anything that we just talked about. What I talk about when I talk about focus is really 3 things. I call them the 3 C's. Okay, so it's communication, customer, and concentration. And we'll kind of unpack each of those briefly as we go through this. But you hit on some of them, and some of them I think you'll see get rolled up into this. But these are the three things, if we can really focus on that and really maintain the conscious effort around them, that greatly improves the probability of business success. So let's go through each of these. The first one I'll start with, obviously, is the all-important customer, right? None of us would be anywhere without a customer. Some of us are still in search of customers. So the key here is, I think if you start a business, most of us would say, if I ask any of you, you probably, who is your customer? You're going to be able to pretty much tell me who your customer is. That's a given. When I say the who is, what happens a lot of times, and I've seen this, is as you start to get into the heat of battle, that things start to come up. And oftentimes, and I've seen this a number of times, where businesses try to go too broad. They're like, well, the more, it's the law of large numbers. The bigger the group or target audience we have, the higher the probability we're going to have to sell into that. And what I've seen, and probably some of you have seen as well, is that's actually not the truth. And in fact, it's actually the opposite. Having a very clearly defined, tightly defined niche is actually a better way to get started rather than trying to appease a much broader group of folks. And so from that perspective, that's when I talk about who's your customer. And I often, when I work with my clients doing this, I often I'll ask that 3, 4, 5 times. Who's your clients? Well, men, great. Men what? Men under 50, okay, good. What else characterizes them, right? Drill it down, really try to get it as precise as possible and target that group. What I find is a lot of companies that do that up front will sometimes lose track of that in the heat of battle when the contracts aren't coming, business isn't coming as fast as they'd like, and all of a sudden, well, let's find an adjacency. Well, this one's close, let's branch out here, let's try this, let's try that, and pretty soon all of a sudden you're back to being very broad. So the key is to really stay focused, and if it's not working and you've given it enough time, pivot, not saying don't pivot, but do it in an intelligent manner. Don't go back to the shotgun approach. And that's where I see a lot of companies trip up as they fall back. It's very easy to fall back to that shotgun approach. The second one is really the what, and it kind of goes hand in hand with that, right? So again, if I ask everybody here, what is your product or service? You could probably tell me what it is. And again, it's kind of the same philosophy that I see companies fall into. It's like, well, what exactly are you delivering to this niche audience? It needs to be very focused. You can't try to be all things to all people. It'll actually end up confusing your customer. And I'm sure I see a few folks smiling and shaking heads, so I'm assuming you may have heard this or experienced it, right? So it's like, so for my industry, I could offer coaching. In fact, I'll use a real case study. So you could offer coaching for new coaches, businesses, authors, speakers, consultants. It's like, oh, okay, that sounds great. Well, I have a customer that says, well, I'm a consultant. I kind of coach, but not really. I'm not really an author, but I do speaking. Is this for me? I'm not sure if this is really my fit or not. And all of a sudden, you've lost that magic moment to really capture the customer. So it's similar to the who. The what is equally important. You got to be really focused on the what. What exactly are you delivering? And again, okay to pivot, but do it in an intelligent manner and make sure when you pivot the what, that you haven't lost the who, right? So those two kind of tend to move together, very similar to what we talked about in terms of timing and market pull, right? They tend to move together, there's a correlation there, right? And then the last one is really the problem being solved. And this one, again, is one where I see a lot of businesses in the heat of battle, it's like things are running behind schedule, your product release is late, customers aren't coming in, and you lose track of the problem trying to be solved. Are you really trying to increase your SEO? And maybe that is the problem you're trying to solve. Or are you really trying to solve a customer problem? The I'm bleeding out of my neck, hemorrhaging, that's the problem. Never lose sight of that problem. Again, in the heat of battle, this is one of those things where you can lose track of it. And when we get to the end here, I'll tell you a few tips and tricks that I use with my clients to help kind of keep that fresh or regain it if it's been lost. So the next one is really around communication. So this is a topic that books have been written, I could give a dissertation on this. So again, trying to narrow it down for this specific group. And again, there's really kind of 3 things. You'll find I like the number 3, by the way. I'm a big fan of the number 3. So the first one is really around transparency and candor. And so this is one where, again, I always tend to tell folks to try to err on the side of communicating more versus less. And it's very simple that in today's connected society, it will get out. particularly if it's bad news, it'll get out. And that's kind of where I'll get to that in the third point, but that it will get out. So you might as well own it, get ahead of it, and communicate it, and let folks know what you're doing about it. On the flip side, I've seen a lot of companies, and this actually surprised me, I would have never guessed this, but I've seen a lot of companies that are actually lack communication on the upside. They're not communicating all the great things they've done and all the wins they've had. And I equate that to scoring a touchdown and not taking your 6 points. Right? It's like, that's silly. Take your points. If you do something great, let the world know. Even if it's a small thing, particularly for startups and smaller businesses, let the world know every time. There's almost like this fear of success going on. Get it out there, let folks know on both sides of the equation. It's really, really important to be transparent about that. The tone, this is something I actually have learned a lot about in the last year as part of my master's project. There's a whole field in this called positive psychology. I don't know, is anybody familiar with positive psychology? So I love it. I've totally gotten into this now. And so the whole concept of positivity and optimism and what that can just do in general. And again, it's not being Pollyannish. It's not saying looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, but from a communications perspective, having an optimistic tone is always a good thing. So even if you're communicating a bad news, try to have an optimistic spin to it. Hey, this bad thing happened. Here's what we're doing about it. And here's why the world is going to be great after all, right? Try to have that positive spin. You see the companies that are really good at communicating, they always do that. The big guy, like the GEs of the world that have, 1,000 people just doing communication. They're really good at spinning anything. Nuclear plant could explode and you'd think GE was the bomb. I'm telling, no pun intended there, but maybe there is. But I mean, seriously, it's just unbelievable how companies can do that. And you can capture that too as a small business. You can capture that same magic. Just keep that positive tone in there. Again, it doesn't mean to blow through negative news or disappointing news, but keep it positive, keep it upbeat. Investors love positivity and positive news, so that definitely helps. And then the last thing is really, again, around the same thing, and I just kind of covered it in the last two, but it's really own both, do both. Don't be afraid to communicate positive, and don't be afraid to communicate negative. Just keep it optimistic as best you can, but own it all and make sure the world knows all the great stuff you're doing. Is really in a nutshell. So the last one is really concentration. This is the one where usually people start scratching their head, going, that's odd. So concentration for me, what I think about when I think concentration, it's really energy. I'm actually in the process of developing this thing called an EROI, or energy ROI on energy. So when I talk about energy, and I'm not going to pull a tree out and go hug a tree, I promise. But what I'm really talking about is really where's your focus? Where are you spending your time? And it starts with the individual, the owner, the CEO, the senior leaders. Where are they spending their physical time? Right. So again, I had an example of a company that I worked with where it was pretty early stage. I think they'd been going only about a year. And they were still struggling to get their first customers going. They had one or two, but nothing, it hadn't ramped like the way they wanted. And the CEO, the owner, was, I don't know, for lack of a better word, freaking out. And so he was spending time doing everything. He was spending time stressing about the website and making sure that it was up and optimized and all that. He was stressing about the product release, which was running a little behind, not horribly behind, a little bit behind, right? Reasonable things to stress about, I would argue. But is that the best use of his physical time versus going out and trying to make sure their customers ready when that product hits the market, right? So again, not passing judgment one way or the other, but think about that in terms of where you spend your physical energy. Same with your mental and emotional energies. Where is your concentration? If the employees are aligned with where the leader wants to go, and they're all focused on that, and the board and the investors, great things happen. It's when you start getting things out of alignment and folks start to concentrate on things that aren't necessarily on the, whatever you want to call it, the critical path to whatever that next milestone is, whether it's the next release, whether it's the next customer, whether it's the next investment, whatever that may be, that's when you start to trip up. And so I'll do little mini energy audits, is what I call them, to say, all right, who are your key people? And where are they spending their time? And are they spending it in the things that are actually going to yield the result you want? And we need The next big customer. Okay, is everybody focusing on the next big customer? We got to get this release out. Is everybody focusing on that, right? And it's okay if different groups are focused on different things, because never in a business, even a small business, are you single threading it, right? So there's going to be some folks that need to be focusing on that website, and there's going to be some folks that need to be focusing on that next software update or release, and there's going to be folks that need to be focusing on the customer. But are folks playing their position, to go back to the football analogy, right? Or does the defensive end keep running over and trying to get the ball hiked to him, right? And so that's when you start to get into chaos. And that's what I mean by concentration and energy. Where's the focus? Who's focusing on what, and are you focusing on the right things at the right time? So two of these other things that I've talked about from a little bit, and I'll just cover briefly, because I think I've kind of hit on these, but from a model perspective, the drivers for the loss of focus, and there's really two that I've seen that kind of come out of here. One is fear, and we talked about this a little bit up front, right? The first is really the fear of failure, which personally, and I'm feeling that every day now as I'm on my own, is a great motivator. Thank you. Yes, thank you, right? So I'm sure we've all been there, and I'm sure we've all felt it, and it's a good motivator as long as you don't let it overwhelm you. Right? When you're losing sleep, your health degrades, that's going to a bad place, right? And so as long as you don't let it overwhelm you, I am actually a big proponent of the fear of failure, because it keeps you going. The fear of success is the one that I found most interesting and surprising, that particularly when folks are starting out, and I think most of the folks here in the room have been going for at least a little while, so maybe it doesn't apply, but I've seen a lot of folks that are starting out, they're actually, in some ways, almost embarrassed to acknowledge what they've done and the success they've had, and they find it very difficult to raise their own flag and do so in a way that's not overly obnoxious, but it does get the point out. You got to get the point out. Now you can, the classic example, I did a radio show last week, and this topic happened to come up by chance, and the guy mentioned the Donald Trump, right? So the Donald has got to be the biggest self-advertiser on the planet that I've seen. I mean, he's crazy at it, but by God, it pays off for him. Now, again, you don't have to like him. You could love him. Doesn't matter. I'm not talking politics, not talking personalities, but his ability to self-promote the things he's doing. It's like, hey, come look at this great hotel we just built. He has no shame in doing that. There's got to be, I hate to say it, and for me as an introvert, it's really hard. But there's got to be a little Donald in all of us to be able to get out there and actually promote ourselves and take credit for the wins that we do and the success. And don't be afraid that folks are going to look at you different. Folks will actually celebrate with you, but it's this weird psychological hump of getting over that. For most people are not natural self-promoters. So that was kind of the focus and how I look at it through the lens. Again, I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm not saying it is the only way, but it does seem to be a way that's resonated and has worked for a number of folks. So how do you get it? How do you kind of get your mojo back or help yourself from alleviating it? So I'll touch upon this a little bit. Again, this actually gets into quite a bit of detail around my methodology, so I'm not going to bore you guys with that tonight. But it's really a three-phase thing. Again, number 3, I love 3. So center, focus, achieve. Again, this is really where you start to get into some of the Eastern philosophy, along with the consulting and the coaching to blend these together. So the centering piece is really a matter of just clarifying what matters. And again, it's asking folks, what are you doing? Who are you doing for? What are your aspirations? And really driving, again, the who and the what. It's really trying to get at some of the who and the what and making sure that stays fresh. You don't end up going too broad on the who, and you don't end up going crazy on the what, having a specific product for each little niche you're in, right? And so it's really, how do you center, clarify what matters, and focus down on that. The focus piece, not to be confused with the topic focus we were just talking about, I know that can be confusing, is really starting to put in place a more structured plan. This is where I've actually spent a lot of my life. Actually, it's great to have a strategy. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have a way to execute on it, it's pretty useless. So it's how do you bridge from strategy to execution? So here it's really kind of going from vision and strategy to how are you actually going to go through and do these types of things. What are you going to do to achieve your objective? Starting to call out what are your current challenges, roadblocks? What are some paths around those? How do you break through it? Again, trying to make it very concrete so that you can actually track and measure progress. Again, being a data-driven person, I like to track and measure things. So I want to know how you're doing as you go along the way. And then the achieve piece is really just a cute word for execute. It's really, what is the specific plan of action you're going to put into place? How are we going to get this software release back on track? What are we going to do differently moving forward over the next 30 days to go land the next 10 customers, for example? What are we going to do differently? And then how are we going to measure it? I think we've probably all heard of SMART goals at this point, but something that's achievable, measurable, et cetera, that you can actually track and measure. And early on, if things aren't going down the path, revisit it, tweak it, refine it, and that's how you can really keep on track. It's honestly the execution piece where I see a lot of folks, particularly in the smaller business, but even in larger businesses, fall down because they get so wrapped up. This is easy because it's fun to think about the vision, the strategy. This is hard because this is where you're actually doing stuff and where the rubber hits the road, and it's that bridge where I see a lot of folks actually get tripped up. And it's like, all right, how do you clarify that and keep it fresh and simple and clear for everybody to know what you're doing and what their part is in the process? All right, I think that was it. Thanks.